Good morning. I'm Asha Swami, and we're continuing with our conversations about Yogananda as the last in the line of the gurus here. And because my understanding of Master comes entirely from Swamiji, the two just get completely interwoven. So that's how we'll continue. I was talking yesterday. Oh, I forgot to pray. We should always pray. Let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence, that you become for us a dearest friend, a constant companion, a confidant, an advisor, that we move through this world with the deep knowledge that we are not alone, but that you are always with us. Make yourself known. Make us receptive so that we can hear you. We are your children. Om. Peace. Amen. Well, I was starting to say, yesterday I was talking about Master's previous incarnations as William the Conqueror and as as Ferdinand III, Swami's relationship to Master in those lives as his biological son and heir, as Henry I in England and Alfonso X in Spain. Part of the reason I'm talking that way is that, we all talk about Yogananda a great deal. We talk about Master, we meditate on him. And so I'm just sort of trying to bring in other ways of looking at it, many things that Swami talked about that he found were interesting, because I feel our lives as a disciple have our lives as disciples. And I know that I'm speaking to an unknown audience, and it goes beyond our immediate Ananda family. But many of the people listening to this will either be formerly disciples or in some way influenced by Yogananda, because his autobiography of a yogi has been the catalyst for almost everyone who ends up in it's hardly even non-traditional now, but who finds themselves in this East-West blend, following a path of self-realization. In one way or another, was touched by the life of Yogananda, by Autobiography of a Yogi. Swamiji used to make it a practice when he was at any audience where it was a more public audience, he would ask, how many people have read Autobiography of a Yogi? And 90% of the audience would raise their hands. Of that number, only a small percentage were Kriyabans, but Master was a revolutionary. And the reason I was talking about him as a warrior and as a world changer by even that kind of action is because as disciples, it becomes us to try to understand what our path is really about. And there's a great deal of emphasis placed on serving the guru, but once Yogananda is out of the body, what does that actually mean? Even in my own life, I had to go through a very important transition in understanding what it is to be a disciple. I'm going to keep backing up a little bit. In the Bible, toward the end of his life, Jesus is with some of his disciples, and it was their habit to call him rabbi or to call him master. That was the way they addressed him. As Swamiji said, not master in the sense that they were enslaved to him, but master of himself. You are a master of yourself, and therefore that reverence, great respect is given. So in the Bible, Jesus says to his disciples, and this is close to the end of Jesus's life, because he knew that the responsibility for what he had put into motion was now going to be in their hands. And he said, you call me master, but I call you friend. He said, because the servant will take care of what belongs to the master, but he will always be, his own home will be in the village. I mean, this is also in the Indian tradition. Often people would come from the villages, they would work in the cities, there'd be a servant in someone's home, but their home would be in the village. They would often even have a family in the village, and every so often they would go and spend some weeks in their true home, and then they would come and care for the master's house. So Jesus, obviously at that time, there was a reality similar to that. He said, the servant will care for the master's home, but it will never be his own. And he will always have his own home somewhere else, and he will simply care for the goods of the master. But he said, a friend takes the burdens and the responsibilities of his friend as his own, because we're standing peer to peer and we're working together for a common cause. So when Jesus said that, I call you friend, that was not, um, it was, of course, an affirmation of his love and his dedication to his disciples, but he was also trying to enlighten them as to the further step that was needed in themselves for them to be good disciples. And even in the life of Arjuna and Krishna, and Arjuna was another previous incarnation, Master said, of his own. Krishna was the manifested form of Babaji at that period of time. And there is also between them, friendship, not merely the disciple and the guru, but also friend to friend. And Master said that friendship is the highest form of love, because every other relationship has some element of coercion in it, is how Master put it. Even a mother and a child, and mother love is considered to be the ideal self-sacrificing love. I mean, the mother literally gives her own flesh and blood in order for the child to have life, and then nurses, through her own breasts, and what the food that she would take in and use for her own body, she gives to the child instead. But there's still an element of coercion is perhaps not exactly the right word, but it's an interesting word. You're compelled. The mother is compelled. Once the pregnancy begins, she doesn't have a choice. I mean, of course, these days people terminate pregnancies, but the pregnancy carries on its own. The mother can't in the morning decide that she's not going to care for the child inside her womb. The body has its own, the divine has its own logic at that point. And a marriage relationship, a brother and sister relationship, the form is imposed, and then the form guides the relationship. But friend is freely chosen. That's what Master said. You choose your friends, you decide whether to keep them. You can walk away from the friendship at any point, and there is nothing there except your own heart's commitment. So, what we want to come to in our relationship, give me a moment. What we want to come to in our relationship with the Guru is that it's an absolutely free choice, meaning I know exactly what I'm doing. There's no element, no part of me is driven to this by dogma, by fear, by social custom, by community pressure. It's that if I were alone and there was no other reality in the world, I would still offer my heart to the Guru. You can see how beautiful and how powerful that would be. In the very beginning years of Ananda, I want to bookmark where I am in this. In the very beginning years of Ananda, Swamiji downplayed his role in the community. In fact, all the way through, except just occasionally in the last years, Swami always downplayed his role. But especially in the first 15, 20 years at least, let me think what it would actually be, 68, 78, 88. It was really well into the 90s before Swamiji really um, accepted a different kind of energy from us collectively. It wasn't until he really started living in Italy, and the relationship of the Italians to him was so much more intuitive and heartfelt than the way Americans related to him. And also, things were different. He accepted a different reality. But with us, especially in the first years, he never asked for and would barely accept any kind of treatment other than that of good friends. He expected us to be good friends to him because he was a good friend to us, but there were no accoutrements of leadership. no, no special reverence, no standing up when he came into the room, just nothing like that. We were just very casual with him, and he insisted upon that, so that whatever whatever sense one developed that his role in one's life might be more significant than that, that his uh, his being a channel for the gurus to us was more significant in our lives, you had to figure it out for yourself. It wasn't like it was the community culture and you looked around and saw how you were supposed to behave and then you behaved that way. You had to really decide within yourself whether this was true or not, which is, it was completely free of the coercive element. It was just friend to friend. And what I was starting to say at the beginning of this is I had the opportunity, because Swami asked me to be his secretary very early, and I also cooked for him, and I had a small role in taking care of his house and a few things like that. In other words, I had many tangible ways to serve him. I could iron his clothes, I could make his dinner, I could bring him tea, I could type his manuscript. So I thought I was returning to Swamiji the friendship that he was giving me, which was important because I wanted it to be a reciprocal relationship. But I deliberately held myself aloof from the project. And the project was the Ananda community and all that Swami was doing to establish us. I mean, I loved the community, but I had in my mind that it was more spiritual to be uninvolved. This was just a what do you say, callow youth that just didn't really understand. It was more spiritual to be uninvolved because, after all, this world is just a dream. I'm here for self-realization. The only thing that matters is my relationship to God. And so it was going on around me, and I didn't I didn't boycott it, but I was not committed to it at all. And I remember driving through the community one day with Swamiji. I was in the back of the car and I was looking out the window, and there were all these dirt roads. And I remember going by the barn and by the publications business and just sort of down into where the old farmhouse was, and just sort of looking at it all and realizing, what tremendous effort it had taken to pull all of that from the bare earth, just drag it up from absolutely nothing. And how I'd been there watching Swami, long hours every day with this unrelenting, absolutely unrelenting commitment and willpower, which when you read Master's life and his campaigns across the country and his efforts to write books and to get lessons and to get people to help him and to get money and to, struggle against American misunderstanding. When you read his letters, when you read the story of his life, he never rested. He just, every day, Master was working to make this happen. So Swamiji and always emulated Master. When I said to Swami once, "The way you behave is the way Master behaved, isn't it?" He said, "Yes, of course." And I said, "And what you don't do is because Master didn't do it." He said, "Yes, of course, with the exception of drinking coffee." But it was a very small thing, Swami freely admitted. In that respect, he diverged from his guru. But that unrelenting determination to build something in this world, he learned it from Master. He didn't make it up. It was the way Master lived. It wasn't that Swami himself needed to do that, but he needed to be a disciple. And Master was working unrelentingly. Master wanted communities. Master had tried himself to start these spiritual communities, which he described as the social pattern of the future, and had been unsuccessful in doing it. Swami felt the commission was his to carry it out. He wasn't doing it for himself. He was doing what Master had asked him to do. That was all that mattered. And I'm in the back seat of the car, just looking out the window with my usual sense of, what does it all matter? It's just a dream. And it crossed my mind that Swamiji and Master were in a much better position than I to declare this world a dream. And yet, where did I even get the idea that this world was a dream? Well, I learned it from them. But look how they were responding to it. I was responding it with this kind of a superior aloofness. And they, Master before him and Swami at this time, were responding to it by pouring their complete life's blood into creating something, dream or not, to have a positive effect on the world. And I realized that it was nice that I was able to type Swami's manuscripts, and it was nice that I was able to give him a cup of tea. But from his perspective, that kind of personal service to him was trivial because he didn't really care about himself. He was letting me fix him a cup of tea because I was there, and it made me happy to do it. But his mind was on serving his guru. And then the idea of friendship came to me. Just what does it mean to be a friend? Because whatever else Swami was and is to me, he was the best friend I've ever known, is the best friend I've ever known. It's hard even to put into words the power of that friendship. It's very interesting because, again, in the path, Swami talks about Master's friendship. He talks about the friendship in God. That was his character. That's how he characterized. Swami characterized being Master's disciple. It was a friendship in God. And he talked about how, because the friendship was in God, it wasn't ruled by sentiment or personal affinity or anything like that. It was two souls meeting in the spirit. He said it demanded the utmost of each one of us. We had to meet, Swami put it, we had to meet Master's friendship on the level that he offered it to us. So again, in the back of the car, all of these ideas are going through my head. What does it mean to be a friend? And I suddenly saw myself as just, and I did not think of myself this way because I was so devoted to serving Swamiji, but I suddenly saw how profoundly selfish I was being. And I thought, I'm not sure if I thought of it then, but maybe I already knew Jesus' statement in the Bible. Maybe it came later. I don't know the sequence there. But nonetheless, it absolutely applied. I was behaving like a servant, which was nice. It was nice to be a servant. It's a positive relationship. But what I really wanted to be was a friend, because Swami was not treating me like a servant. He wasn't treating me like someone whose interests were separate from his own. He was treating me like a friend, like we're in this together, but I wasn't really in it. And on that day, that was when I realized that if this is important to Swamiji, and it's important to Swami because it was important to Master, if I'm going to call myself a disciple, it has to be important to me. And that, that's a very interesting. There's a lot of ramifications of that, which I have been working with ever since. That was sometime in the early mid 70s that this thought came to me. I've been working with that ever since. What is my responsibility as a disciple? And Swamiji, well, let's go back to Master. Master had this assignment that he knew was from Babaji, that he knew was from God. And even though in Autobiography of a Yogi, he tells the story in kind of almost a lighthearted way. Master tells the story of, finding the storeroom in his school in 1920. He found the storeroom where he could have a few moments of privacy to meditate, where his little children wouldn't find him. And he talks about sitting there meditating and having a vision of all these Western faces. And the way Master says it, he says, Americans, these must be Americans. And then it occurs to him that it's time for him to come to America. And from the morning to the afternoon, he resigns his position, turns his whole school over to the staff that's there, heads off to make the arrangements to come to America. Now, other accounts of Master's life written by people who were there tell us that, in fact, Master always knew he was coming to the West. So he tells it certainly that vision told him that now is the moment. But the idea that he was going to the West was not a surprise. He'd been sent to Sri Yukteswar to be trained for that. And certainly Sri Yukteswar would have mentioned it to him. Why would he have kept it a secret? And of course, Master himself had the vision to know. But as Swami said, that being an avatar is sort of like seeing a movie for the second time. you know what the whole plot is, you know how it's going to work out, except you don't think about the fact that you know. Now, I don't know how exactly how complete that analogy is, but it does give you an idea. I mean, one of the interesting things that Swami talks about, either in the Path or in his biography of Yogananda, I'm not sure which one it is. He talks about there's several parts to it. There was a time in Master's early life when he was still training with Sri Yukteswar, when Sri Yukteswar speaks to Master's father, and he speaks of certain failings that Yogananda is expressing at this time, making them seem as if they're global in their implications. And Master's father becomes extremely worried about Master and rushes to him and is greatly reassured to see that he's not just shattered by his spiritual failure. And Master says that Sri Yukteswar's displeasure with him at that time was because Master was determined to convert one of his boyhood friends, bring one of his boyhood friends onto the path of self-realization. And Sri Yukteswar kept hinting to him that he should not do that this particular man should not be converted. But in fact, Master ignored him and went ahead and brought the man onto the path, eventually brought the man to America. He was Swami Dhirananda. And then Dhirananda, at a certain point, completely betrayed Master, um, took all the assets of Mount Washington, married a white woman, which is, it's just the first time somebody called me a white woman, and I know these days racial issues are really important. And so I actually say this in an interesting way. I was in India and someone referred to a friend of theirs marrying a white woman. And I thought, oh my gosh, that means an American, And it was like, I suddenly realized, oh, yes, in this context, I'm a white woman. Never thought of it before, but it's the truth. And so that's what they say, that Dhirananda came and he married a white woman. It's just he married an American. And as he took Master to court and he won, he took a great deal of money from Master, just complete betrayal, absolute betrayal. Master had left all of his work in Dhirananda's hands while he traveled around the country. Then Master appeared to be completely, uh, surprised and dismayed that his best friend had betrayed him like this. But when Master had been a teenager, a young man in India, he'd said to someone else, "Oh yes, eventually this man will marry a white woman and betray me." That's what he said. So he always knew it was coming. But when it came, he acted as if the plot was new to him, beyond me to understand. So now coming back into all of this, Swami talked about the quality of friendship, that Master asked of us because we had to meet him on that level. So, what I was saying is, so that issue of trying to actually be a friend to Swamiji, which is making my priorities the same as his. Master's priority was not how he felt about things. Master's priority was getting the work done. Just as simple as that. And I saw that in Swami continuously. So how am I going to be a true friend? Well, the work, which is bringing self-realization to the West. I mean, that's what matters to Swami because that's what mattered to Master. So what can I do? What can I do today that I didn't do yesterday? What can I do tomorrow? So this ambition as a disciple becomes a very important part of this. Over the course of the last few months, many of you know I conducted interviews with about 50 of what would be the millennials, is what I called it, which is to say, the next group of leaders within Ananda. And one of the questions I was asking myself as I talked to them, was, are you ambitious? Are you ambitious as a disciple? And we can be ambitious for God realization, but our masters did not just come and say, realize God, especially Yogananda, because he was the one in whom the entire lineage, came to a focus, and he became the public face of it. In fact, the reason we know about the other masters is Autobiography of a Yogi primarily. Of course, in India, there have been direct lineages, but the global recognition of this line of masters is because Yogananda wrote Autobiography of a Yogi. And he gave us the story of Babaji and the Hiri and Sri Yukteswar. And he gave us the story of what it means to be a disciple. I mean, that's the first sentence of Autobiography of a Yogi, the disciple-guru relationship. So this whole sort of reality, and this is where we'll talk about it a little more tomorrow, this whole reality of discipleship, of gurus, of Indian masters. When Swami read that book in 1948, the entire idea of, of a self-realized master being a guru, it's to Swamiji, it was just a complete unknown. Now it's common parlance. These words have integrated themselves into the English language to the level where they are totally abused all the time and utterly misunderstood. Both the word avatar and guru have just attained terrible secondary meanings that are very unfortunate because these are sacred concepts. But it's also a tremendous compliment, to the degree to which Master's revolution has just permeated through the culture, so people can just refer to these things, misunderstanding them a great deal of the time, karma and chakras, a lot of different words, because of his presence, because Master was intensely ambitious for God. So as disciples, how do we express that ambition? What are we ambitious for? Now, of course, it still comes back to the first ambition has to be for our consciousness, because it serves us nothing. It serves us nothing to conquer the whole world if we haven't mastered ourselves. So the effort, the ambition to master our own, to become master of our own destiny, to attain the degree of self-mastery that describes Master himself, same word repeating here, but you understand what I mean. But part of the way we attain that self-mastery is through our discipleship. And if the highest relationship with the Guru is one of friend, and if Jesus himself describes a friend as someone who embraces the cause of his friend as his own, and so all of this brings me back to why I started with William the Conqueror and Fernando III. We have to really understand the personality and the intention of our master. Swami's actual own commitment to starting, vowing that he would start these communities that Master thought were so important were from the garden party, and I believe it was July 29th, which really should be celebrated. July 29th, I don't know what year it was, 49, 50, I'm not sure, 1949 or 50. But Master spoke to 700 or 800 people, and Swamiji said he thinks all the SRF monks and nuns were attending that party, or at least the key ones, the ones that were the core of Master's work, because it was this huge garden party run by offered by one of Master's supporters. And he said Master spoke more powerfully, Swami said, than he had ever heard any human being speak. My words are registered in the ether, and they shall move the west. Thousands of youths shall go north, south, east, and west, covering the earth with these small colonies, showing that playing, living, and high thinking bring the greatest happiness. I mean, that was the sense of it, if not every word is true. Swami said, I wouldn't have been surprised if legions of angels, if the heavens, I wouldn't have been surprised, Swami said, if the heavens had opened and legions of angels came marching out to carry out the Master's words. And Swami said, of all the hundreds of people there, he was the only one who took up the clarion call. I mean, of the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. This is what we're looking for. This is who Master was. So because discipleship is so essential to our path, I want to try to talk about the vibratory power of what it means to be a disciple, and at least the options that are open to us. Now, of course, my life is unique. I have my own destiny. Your life is unique. Everybody's life is unique. So merely because this is how I've chosen to interpret it doesn't mean by any means that everybody should interpret it the same way. But we should all stand at the same a starting point, the same point of origin. As a disciple of a master like this, what is being asked of me? And we'll continue with that tomorrow. God bless you.